The snow was falling softly that December evening, each flake drifting down like a whispered secret from the heavens above. Margaret stood at her kitchen window, her fingertips resting gently against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep through in contrast with the warmth of the room behind her. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of apple cider simmering on the stove. She could hear the gentle bubbling of the pot, a rhythmic sound that had become the soundtrack of her winter evenings. Outside, the world was transforming into a pristine blanket of white, the kind of snow that made everything look new again, untouched and full of possibility. She was 72 years old now, and Christmas had become a quieter affair over the years. Her children lived far away, scattered across the country with families of their own, and though they called regularly and visited when they could, the house felt emptier during the holidays. The silence was not unwelcome, exactly, but it carried with it a weight of memories, of Christmases past when the house had been filled with laughter and chaos, with the sound of children running to the halls and the smell of her late husband's pipe tobacco mixing with the scent of pine from a tree they would decorate together. Margaret turned away from the window and walked slowly to the living room, her slippers making soft shuffling sounds against the hardwood floor. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, smaller than the ones from years past, but still beautiful with its twinkling lights casting a warm golden glow across the room. She had decorated herself this year, hanging each ornament with care, remembering the story behind every single one. There was the little wooden angel her daughter had made in second grade, the painted glass ball from their trip to Germany 30 years ago, the felt snowman that had been a gift from her husband on their first Christmas together. She settled into her favorite armchair, the one by the fireplace where the cushions had molded perfectly to her shape over the decades. The fire crackled and popped, sending occasional sparks up the chimney, and the heat radiated outward in waves that made her cheeks flush. She pulled a soft wool blanket over her lap, one that her grandmother had knitted long ago, the yarn still holding together despite its age, though the colors had faded from vibrant reds and greens to softer, more muted tones. The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through the peaceful silence like a sharp note in a gentle melody. Margaret looked up, surprised. She was not expecting anyone. The sound came again, more insistent this time, and she pushed herself up in the chair with a small grunt effort, her knees protesting slightly as they always did these days. She made her way to the front door, her hand trailing along the wall for balance, and peered through the frosted glass panel beside the door. A young postal worker stood on her porch, bundled up in a thick blue jacket with a fur line had pulled up against the cold. Snowflakes had settled on his shoulders and in his dark hair, and his breath came out in visible puffs of white vapor. He was holding a small package and what looked like an envelope. Margaret opened the door, and immediately the cold air rushed in, sharp and biting against her face, carrying with it the clean scent of fresh snow and winter pine. "Good evening, ma'am," the young man said, his voice friendly and warm despite the cold. His cheeks were red from the wind, and he was smiling. "I have a delivery for you. Sorry for the late hour, but we have been backed up with the holiday mail." Margaret smiled back at him, feeling a small flutter of curiosity. "Oh, that is quite all right, dear. I was not expecting anything." She reached out to take the items from him, her fingers brushing against his cold-gloved hand. The package was light, wrapped in brown paper, and the envelope was thick, made of cream-colored paper that felt expensive and substantial between her fingers. The postal worker nodded, stamping his feet slightly to keep warm. "You have a wonderful evening, ma'am. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you too, dear. Drive safely in this weather." She closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, looking down at what she held. The package had her name and address written in neat, printed letters, but there was no return address. The envelope, however, made her heart skip a beat. The handwriting was elegant and flowing, done in what looked like fountain pen ink that had faded slightly to a brownish hue. The address was correct, but the postmark made her hands begin to tremble. December 23rd, 2004. 20 years ago. Margaret felt her breath catch in her throat. She walked slowly back to her chair, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. How could a letter be 20 years late? She sank into the cushions and held the envelope up to the light from the fire, studying it carefully. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, and there were small creases and marks that suggested it had been on quite a journey. With trembling fingers, she carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear the delicate paper. Inside was a Christmas card, the kind with a beautiful winter scene painted on the front. It showed a small cottage covered in snow, with warm light glowing from the windows and smoke curling up from the chimney into a starlit sky. She opened the card slowly, and a photograph fell out onto her lap. Margaret picked up the photo with shaking hands. It was old, the colors slightly faded, but she recognized it immediately. It showed a young couple standing in front of a Christmas tree, their arms around each other, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. The woman wore a red sweater and had her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The man was tall and handsome, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at the image. It was her and Thomas, her late husband, taken at a Christmas party so many years ago that she had almost forgotten it existed. She looked back at the card, and there, written in that same elegant handwriting, was a message that made her heart ache with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow. "My dearest Margaret," the message began, "I am writing this on Christmas Eve, and my heart is so full of love and gratitude that I had to put it into words. This year has been one of the most beautiful of my life, and it is all because of you. Every morning, I wake up grateful that I get to spend another day by your side. Every evening I fall asleep counting my blessings, and you are always at the top of that list." Margaret had to pause, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Thomas had died 15 years ago, after a long battle with illness. She had been with him until the very end, holding his hand as he took his last breath. The grief had been overwhelming at first, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe, hard to imagine continuing without him. But time had softened the sharp edges of that pain, and now when she thought him, it was mostly with warmth and love, remembering all the good years they had shared together. She continued reading, her vision blurred with tears. "I know I did not say it enough," the letter went on, "but you are my everything. You are my best friend, my partner, my home. When I look at you, I see all the Christmases we have shared and all the ones still to come. I see the life we have built together, the children we have raised, the memories we have created. I see a future full of quiet mornings and laughter and holding hands while we watch the snow fall. I found this photograph today while I was looking for something in the attic, and it made me smile so much. Do you remember that party? We were so young then, so full of dreams and plans. And look at us now. We have lived those dreams, Margaret. We have built that life we talked about on those long winter nights when we were first married. And I would not change a single moment of it. I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, you'll always be the greatest gift I have ever received. Not just at Christmas, but every single day. You are my miracle, my love, my everything. Merry Christmas, my darling. Here is to 50 more years of love and laughter and Christmas mornings together. Forever yours, Thomas." Margaret sat in her chair, the card clutched to her chest, and let the tears flow freely. They were not tears of sadness, exactly, though there was sadness there. They were tears of love, of remembrance, of gratitude for having had someone who loved her so completely. The fire crackled beside her, and outside the snow continued to fall, and for a moment she could almost feel Thomas there with her, his presence as real and warm as it had been all those years ago. She did not know how the card had taken 20 years to reach her. Perhaps it had been lost in a postal facility somewhere, buried under other mail, forgotten until someone found it and decided to send on its way. Perhaps it had been on a journey of its own, waiting for exactly the right moment to arrive. It did not really matter. What mattered was that it was here now, a message from the past, a reminder of a love that had never truly left her. Margaret looked at the photograph again, studying the faces of those two young people who had no idea what lay ahead of them. They did not know about the challenges they would face, the sorrows they would endure, the losses that would break their hearts. But they also did not know about the joy that awaited them, the laughter that would fill their home, the deep and abiding love that would sustain them through everything. She remembered that Christmas, 2004. It had been a good one. Their children had been home. The house had been full of noise and activity, and Thomas had been healthy and strong. They had stayed up late on Christmas Eve, wrapping last-minute presents and drinking hot chocolate. And he had kissed her under the mistletoe hanging in the doorway. She remembered the feel of his lips on hers, warm and familiar, and the way he had smiled at her afterward, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was truly happy. Had he written this card that night? Had he planned to give it to her on Christmas morning, only to forget in the chaos of the day? Or had he mailed it, intending as a surprise, never knowing that it would not arrive for 2 decades, long after he was gone? Margaret set the photograph gently on the side table and looked at the small package that had come with the card. She picked it up, feeling its weight in her hands, and carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a small wooden box, simple and unadorned, with a tiny brass clasp holding it closed. She opened it slowly, and her breath caught once more. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red velvet, was a delicate silver locket. Margaret lifted it out with trembling fingers, feeling the cool metal against her skin. It was beautiful, with an intricate floral pattern engraved on the front. She pressed the tiny clasp on the side, and the locket opened to reveal 2 small spaces for photographs. One side was empty, but the other held a tiny picture, so small she had to hold it close to see it clearly. It was Thomas, looking young and handsome, smiling at the camera with that expression she knew so well. And suddenly, with a clarity that took her breath away, Margaret remembered. She remembered Thomas showing her a locket catalog months before that Christmas, asking her opinion on different styles. She remembered him being secretive and excited about something in the weeks leading up to the holiday. She remembered him seeming disappointed on Christmas morning, though he had tried to hide it, and she had assumed it was because one of the children had not liked their gift or because the turkey had been slightly overcooked. He had ordered this for her. He had written that beautiful card to go with it, and somehow, impossibly, it had never arrived. Until now, Margaret fastened the locket around her neck, her fingers fumbling slightly with the clasp. The silver was cold at first against her skin, but it quickly warmed, and she pressed her hand over it, feeling the shape of it through her sweater. It felt right there, like it had always been meant to be worn, even if it had taken 20 years to find its way to her. She sat in her chair for a long time, watching the fire burn down to glowing embers, listening to the wind outside and the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of memories, full of love, full of the presence of everyone who had ever lived within these walls, and filled them with laughter and warmth. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Margaret woke early. The sun had not yet risen, and the world outside her window was still dark, though the snow had stopped falling during the night. She made herself a cup of tea, the kettle whistling cheerfully in the quiet kitchen, and she carried it to the living room where she plugged in the Christmas tree lights. They blinked on, casting their warm glow across the room, and she sat down with her tea, feeling the steam rise up and warm her face. She had made a decision during the night. Lying awake in her bed with the locket still around her neck, she was going to call her children and invite them home for Christmas. Not next year, not someday, but now, today. She wanted them here, wanted to fill the house with noise and laughter again, wanted to cook a big meal and watch her grandchildren open presents under the tree. Life was too short, too precious, to wait for the perfect moment. This was the perfect moment right now, and she was not going to let it pass by. She picked up the phone and dialed her daughter Sarah first. The phone rang several times, and Margaret worried that it was too early, that she would wake everyone up. But then Sarah answered, her voice thick with sleep, but warm with surprise. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, sweetheart," Margaret said, and she could hear the smile in her own voice. "I am sorry to call so early. I just wanted to ask you something. I know you were planning to stay home this Christmas, and I understand that. But I would love it if you could come here instead. You and David and the kids. I want us all to be together." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Margaret could hear muffled voices as Sarah spoke to her husband. Then Sarah came back on, and her voice was filled with emotion. "Mom, we would love that. We were actually feeling sad about not being with you. Let me talk to David and figure out the logistics. But yes, we will come." Margaret felt her heart swell with joy. She called her son Michael next, and then her youngest daughter Emily, and both of them said yes without hesitation. They would all be there by that evening, driving through the snow and the cold to be together for Christmas. After she hung up the phone, Margaret sat for a moment, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. Then she stood up, energized by a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. She had so much to do. She needed to prepare the guest rooms, to go to the store for food, to make sure there were enough towels and blankets and space for everyone. The house needed to come alive again, and she was going to make that happen. She spent the day in a flurry of activity, moving from room to room, dusting and cleaning and arranging. She pulled out the extra blankets from the linen closet, the ones that smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets. She kept there. She made up the beds in the guest rooms, smoothing the sheets and fluffing the pillows. She went to the grocery store, pushing her cart through the crowded aisles, picking out ingredients for all of Thomas's favorite Christmas dishes: ham with brown sugar glaze, scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade rolls, and the special cranberry sauce recipe that had been passed down through her family for generations. The store was busy, filled with last-minute shoppers, and Christmas music played over the speakers. Margaret found herself humming along as she shopped, feeling lighter than she had in years. People smiled at her as she passed, and she smiled back, feeling connected to all of them in the shared experience of preparing for the holiday. When she got home, she unpacked the groceries and started preparing what she could in advance. She peeled potatoes and put them in water. She mixed the ingredients for the rolls and set the dough to rise. She prepared the green beans and made the sauce for the casserole. The kitchen filled with wonderful smells, and she worked steadily, her hands remembering the motions from decades of Christmas preparations. As the afternoon light began to fade, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her heart leaped, and she wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the front door. Sarah and her family were the first to arrive, tumbling out of their car in a chaos of luggage and excitement. The children, Emma, who was 10, and Jack, who was 7, ran up the snowy walkway and threw themselves into Margaret's arms, nearly knocking her over with their enthusiasm. "Grandma!" Emma cried, her voice high and excited. "We are here. We are going to have Christmas with you." Margaret hugged them both tightly, breathing in the scent of their shampoo and the cold winter air that clung to their coats. "Oh, my darlings, I am so happy you are here. Come inside where it is warm." Sarah and David followed, carrying bags and presents, and Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you for inviting us, Mom. This is exactly what we needed." Within the next hour, Michael arrived with his wife Jennifer and their teenage son Christopher, and then Emily came with her partner Rachel. The house transformed from quiet and still to loud and chaotic, filled with voices and laughter and the sound of footsteps running up and down the stairs. The children explored every room, exclaiming over the decorations and the tree, and the adults gathered in the kitchen, helping Margaret with the final preparations for dinner. They ate together that evening, crowded around the dining room table that Margaret had extended to its full length. She had brought out the good china, the set that had been a wedding gift from Thomas's parents, and the crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. The food was delicious, and everyone ate until they were full, passing dishes back and forth, talking and laughing and sharing stories. Margaret sat at the head of the table, where Thomas used to sit, and looked around at all the faces she loved. Her children, grown now with lives and families of their own. Her grandchildren, so full of energy and joy. And she felt Thomas there with them, his presence as real as the warmth from the candles burning in the center of the table. After dinner, they moved to the living room, and Margaret told them about the card and the locket. She showed them a photograph, and they passed it around, marveling at how young their parents had looked. Sarah cried, and Michael put his arm around his mother's shoulders, and Emily held her hand. "That is so beautiful, Mom," Sarah said, wiping at her eyes. "It is like Dad sent you a message, reminding you that he is still with you." "He is," Margaret said softly, touching the locket at her throat. "He always will be." They stayed up late that night, talking and reminiscing, sharing memories of Thomas and of Christmases past. The children eventually fell asleep on the floor by the tree, curled up in blankets with the lights twinkling above them. The adults talked in quieter voices, not wanting to wake them, and the fire burned low in the fireplace. Finally, as midnight approached, they all went to bed, climbing the stairs in a tired but happy procession. Margaret was the last one up, making sure the fire was safely banked and the lights were turned off. She stood in the living room for a moment, looking at the tree and the sleeping children and feeling a profound sense of peace. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the railing, and went to her bedroom. She changed into her nightgown and brushed her teeth, and then she sat on the edge of her bed and carefully removed the locket, holding it in her hands for a moment before placing it on her nightstand where she could see it. She lay down and pulled the covers up, feeling the familiar comfort of her own bed, and closed her eyes. But sleep did not come immediately. Her mind was too full, too active with thoughts and feelings. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had built together, about the love that had sustained them through everything. She thought about her children and grandchildren, sleeping peacefully in the rooms around her, and she felt grateful beyond words that they were here. And she thought about the card, about its impossible journey through time and space to reach her exactly when she needed it most. She did not believe in coincidences. Not really. She believed that there was a pattern of things, a meaning that was not always visible but was always there, waiting to be discovered. The card had arrived when she was feeling most alone, most disconnected from the past, and uncertain about the future. And it had reminded her that love does not end, that the bonds we form with the people we care about transcend time and distance, and even death itself. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing she knew, she was being woken by the sound of children's voices, high and excited, calling out that it was Christmas morning. She opened her eyes to see pale winter light filtering through her curtains, and she could hear footsteps running down the hallway and the sound of laughter from downstairs. She got up and put on her robe and slippers, and fastened the locket around her neck once more. Then she made her way downstairs, following the sound of her family. The living room was already full of activity. The children were sitting by the tree, examining the presents with barely contained excitement, and the adults were gathered around with cups of coffee, looking tired but happy. "Grandma," Jack called out when he saw her. "Can we open presents now, please?" Margaret laughed and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, let us open presents." The next hour was a beautiful chaos of wrapping paper and ribbons, of exclamations of delight, and thank yous and hugs. The children tore through their presents with enthusiasm, and the adults opened theirs more slowly, savoring each one. Margaret received thoughtful gifts from each of her children, things they had chosen with care, and she felt touched by their love and attention. But the gift that meant the most to her was not something she could hold in her hands. It was the gift of having them all there, together, filling her home with life and love. It was the gift of this moment, this perfect Christmas morning, which she would remember for the rest of her days. After the presents were opened and the wrapping paper had been gathered up and thrown away, Margaret went to the kitchen to start preparing Christmas dinner. Sarah and Emily joined her, and they worked together, talking and laughing, their hands moving in practiced coordination. They peeled and chopped and stirred, and the kitchen filled with the most wonderful smells. The ham went into the oven, filling the air with the sweet scent of brown sugar and cloves. The rolls rose and were baked until they were golden brown. The potatoes were layered with cream and cheese and baked until they were bubbling and perfect. Michael and David took the children outside to play in the snow, and their shouts and laughter drifted in through the windows. Margaret could see them from the kitchen, building a snowman and having a snowball fight, and the sight made her heart feel full to bursting. By early afternoon, everything was ready, and they gathered once more around the dining room table. Margaret said grace, her voice steady and clear, thanking God for food and for family and for the love that bound them all together. And then they ate, and it was every bit as wonderful as she had hoped it would be. As the afternoon wore on and the light outside began to fade, they moved back to the living room. The children were tired now, their energy spent, and they curled up on the couch with blankets. The adults sat around talking quietly, and someone suggested they share their favorite Christmas memories. They went around the room, each person sharing a story. Michael talked about the year he got his first bicycle and how Thomas had stayed up all night putting it together. Emily remembered the Christmas when they had gotten snowed in and had to make do with whatever food was in the house, turning it into an adventure. Sarah shared a memory of her mother teaching her how to make sugar cookies, and how they had decorated them with colored icing and sprinkles. When it was Margaret's turn, She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "My favorite Christmas memory is this one. Right now, having all of you here with me. This is the gift I did not know I needed, and it is more precious to me than anything else in the world." There were tears in several eyes when she finished speaking, and Sarah came over to hug her mother tightly. "We love you, Mom," she whispered, "so much." As evening fell and the house grew quiet once more, Margaret found herself back in her favorite chair by the fireplace. The children had gone to bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day, and the adults had retired to their rooms to rest. She sat alone in the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights, holding Thomas's card in her hands once more, reading his words again. She thought about the journey that card had taken, the mysterious path that had brought it to her after 20 years. She thought about all the hands it must have passed through, all the places it must have been, and she thought about the timing of its arrival, how it had come exactly when she needed to be reminded that love never truly leaves us, that the people we have lost are never really gone as long as we carry them in our hearts. She looked at the photograph again, at those two young people who had no idea what the future held. If she could go back and tell them what was coming, would she? Would she warn them about the hard times, the losses, the pain? Or would she tell them to embrace every moment, to hold tight to each other, to trust that the love they share would be enough to carry them through anything? She thought she would probably tell them nothing, because knowing the future would rob them of the joy of discovering it together, of facing each challenge as it came and growing stronger because of it. The journey was what mattered, not the destination. And what a beautiful journey it had been. Margaret stood up slowly, feeling the pleasant ache in her muscles from the busy day. She walked to the window and looked out at the snow-covered yard, at the snowman the children had built, at the tracks her feet had left in the pristine white surface. The moon was rising full and bright, casting silver light across everything, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She pressed her hand against the window, feeling the cold glass beneath her palm, and she whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for the card, for the locket, for the reminder. Thank you for all the years we had together, and for the love that continues even now. I miss you every day, but I am not alone. I carry you with me always." And in that moment, standing at the window with her family sleeping peacefully around her and the Christmas lights twinkling behind her, Margaret felt a profound sense of completeness. The card had been a gift, yes, but not just from Thomas. It had been a gift from life itself, a reminder that miracles do happen, that love transcends all boundaries, and that sometimes the things we need most arrive exactly when we are ready to receive them. She turned away from the window and walked slowly through the house, checking on each sleeping family member. She looked in on Emma and Jack, curled up together in one of the guest beds, their faces peaceful in sleep. She peeked into Michael and Jennifer's room, where they were both reading quietly. She stopped by Emily and Rachel's door and heard them talking softly, their voices a gentle murmur in the darkness. Finally, she went to her own room and prepared for bed. She changed into her nightgown and brushed her hair, looking at herself in the mirror. She saw an old woman looking back at her, with silver hair and lines around her eyes and mouth. But she also saw strength there and wisdom and a deep capacity for love that had only grown over the years. She climbed into bed and reached for the locket on her nightstand, holding it for a moment before setting it back down. Then she turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the sound of the house settling around her, to the soft creaks and sighs that were as familiar to her as her own breathing. Sleep came more easily this time, and as she drifted off, she dreamed of Thomas. They were young again, standing in front of that Christmas tree from the photograph, and he was holding her close and whispering in her ear. She could not quite make out the words, but she knew they were words of love, and that was enough. The days after Christmas passed in a warm blur of activity and togetherness. The family stayed for nearly a week, and Margaret treasured every moment. They played games and watched movies and took long walks in the snow. They cooked meals together and told stories and laughed until their sides hurt. The children helped Margaret bake cookies, getting flour everywhere and eating more dough than they probably should have, and she did not mind one bit. On New Year's Eve, they all gathered in the living room to watch the ball drop on television. Margaret stayed awake until midnight, something she had not done in years. And when the clock struck 12, they all hugged and kissed and wished each other a happy new year. And Margaret felt, deep in her bones, that it would be a happy year, that she had been given a gift, a second chance to appreciate what she had, and she was not going to waste it. When the time came for everyone to leave, the goodbyes were bittersweet. Margaret hugged each person tightly, breathing in their scents, memorizing to feel their arms around her. The children cried a little, not wanting to go, and she promised them that they would come back soon, that this would not be the last time. After they had all driven away, their cars disappearing down the snowy road, Margaret stood on her porch for a long time, waving until they were out of sight. Then she went back inside, and the house was quiet once more. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was not the silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet that comes after a house has been filled with love and laughter. The echoes of her family's presence remained in every room, and she could feel them even in their absence. She spent the rest of the winter in a state of contentment she had not known in years. She wore the locket every day, and whenever she felt lonely or sad, she would touch it and remember Thomas's words. "You are my everything. You will always be the greatest gift I have ever received." She talked to her children more often, calling them just to hear their voices, to ask about their days, to tell them she loved them. She made plans to visit them in the spring, to see their homes and their lives, to be a more active presence in their world. And they, in turn, called her more often, checking in, sharing news, making sure she knew she was loved and valued. Margaret also began to reach out to old friends she had lost touch with over the years. She wrote letters, made phone calls, arranged lunch dates. She reconnected with people who had been important to her, and she made new friends as well, joining a book club at the local library and volunteering at the community center. She discovered that life, even at 72, was still full of possibilities, that it was never too late to make changes, to reach out, to embrace joy. The card had taught her that, had reminded her that love and connection were what mattered most, and that she still had so much to give and so much to receive. As winter turned to spring, and the snow melted away to reveal the green grass beneath, Margaret planted a garden. She had not gardened in years, not since Thomas had died, and she had let the flower beds go to weeds. But now she felt inspired to bring beauty back into her yard, to create something living and growing. She planted roses and tulips and daffodils, and she planted a special section of forget-me-nots, Thomas's favorite flower. She worked in the garden every day, her hands in the soil, feeling the sun on her back and the breeze in her hair. And as the flowers began to bloom, she felt a sense of renewal, of rebirth, as if she too was blooming after a long winter. One warm afternoon in May, Margaret was working in the garden when she heard a car pull into her driveway. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Sarah getting out with Emma and Jack. They had come for a surprise visit, and Margaret's heart filled with joy at the sight of them. "Grandma," the children called, running across the lawn to hug her. "We came to see you." Margaret hugged them tightly, not caring that her hands were dirty from the soil. "I am so happy to see you. What a wonderful surprise." They spent the afternoon together, and Margaret showed them the garden, pointing out each flower and telling them its name. Emma was particularly fascinated by the forget-me-nots, and Margaret told her about how they had been Grandpa Thomas's favorite. "Why are they called forget-me-nots?" Emma asked, her young face serious and curious. Margaret knelt down beside her granddaughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because they're a reminder, sweetheart, a reminder that the people we love are never truly gone. We carry them in our hearts always, and these little flowers help us remember that." Emma nodded solemnly, and then she picked one of the tiny blue flowers and tucked it behind her ear. "I will never forget Grandpa," she said, even though I did not know him very well. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of love and gratitude. "That is right, darling, and he would have loved you so much." That evening, after Sarah and the children had left, Margaret sat on her porch and watched the sun set. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange and purple, and the air was warm and sweet with the scent of flowers. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling its familiar weight, and she thought about the journey she'd been on since that snowy December evening when the card had arrived. She had been given a gift, a reminder that love never ends, that the bond we form with others are eternal. And she had taken that gift and used it to transform her life, to open herself up to connection and joy and possibility. She had learned that grief and love could coexist, that remembering the past did not mean being trapped in it, and that there was still so much beauty and wonder to be found in the world. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Margaret made a silent promise to Thomas and to herself. She would continue to live fully, to love deeply, to embrace each day as the gift it was. She would honor his memory not by dwelling in sadness, but by celebrating the love they had shared and by sharing that love with others. The months passed, and Margaret's life continued to unfold in ways that surprised and delighted her. She traveled to visit each of her children, spending time in their homes, getting to know their friends and neighbors, becoming a part of their daily lives in a way she had not been before. She attended Emma's school play and Jack's soccer games. She helped Michael and Jennifer paint their living room. She went to a concert with Emily and Rachel, and discovered she loved live music more than she had remembered. And through it all, she wore the locket, and she kept the card in a special place on her nightstand where she could see it every morning when she woke and every evening before she went to sleep. It had become a talisman for her, a physical reminder of the invisible threads that connected her to everyone she loved, both living and gone. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn brilliant shades of red and gold, Margaret received a phone call from the local newspaper. A reporter had heard about the Christmas card that had arrived 20 years late, and she wanted to write a story about it. Margaret was hesitant at first, not sure she wanted to share something so personal with strangers. But then she thought about how the card had changed her life, and she wondered if perhaps sharing the story might touch someone else who needed to hear it. So she agreed to the interview, and the reporter came to her house on a crisp October afternoon. They sat in the living room, and Margaret told her the whole story. From the moment the postal worker had arrived at her door to the Christmas she had shared with her family, to the ways her life had changed in the months since. The reporter listened intently, taking notes, and when Margaret finished, there were tears in the young woman's eyes. "That is the most beautiful story I have ever heard," the reporter said softly. "Thank you for sharing it with me." The article was published a few weeks later, and Margaret was surprised by the response. People from all over the country wrote to her, sharing their own stories of love and loss, of unexpected gifts and second chances. She received letters from widows and widowers who had been inspired by her story to reach out to their families, from people who had been estranged from loved ones and had decided to reconcile, from those who had been reminded that it was never too late to change, to grow, to open their hearts. Margaret read every letter and responded to as many as she could. She found herself becoming a kind of informal counselor, offering words of comfort and encouragement to strangers who had been touched by her story. And in doing so, she discovered yet another way to honor Thomas's memory, by spreading the love and kindness he had always embodied. As December approached once more, Margaret began to prepare for another Christmas with her family. This time, there was no hesitation, no question about whether they would come. It had become a new tradition, one that everyone looked forward to. They would all gather at her house, filling it with noise and laughter and love, and they would celebrate not just a holiday, but the bonds that held them together. On Christmas Eve, as Margaret stood in her kitchen preparing the same dishes she had made the year before, she thought about how much had changed in just 12 months. She thought about the woman she had been, lonely and disconnected, going through the motions of life without truly living it. And she thought about the woman she had become, engaged and connected, open to joy and possibility. The doorbell rang, and she heard the sound of her family arriving, their voices calling out greetings, the children's laughter echoing through the house. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet them, her heart full to overflowing. As she hugged each person, breathing in their familiar scents, feeling their arms around her, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for the card," she thought. "Thank you for the reminder. Thank you for giving me back my life." That evening, after dinner, they gathered in the living room as they had the year before. The children were playing with their new toys, and the adults were relaxing with cups of coffee and tea. Margaret sat in her favorite chair, watching them all, and she felt a profound sense of peace. Sarah came over and sat on the arm of the chair, putting her arm around her mother's shoulders. "You look happy, Mom," she said softly. "I am," Margaret replied, reaching up to squeeze her daughter's hand. "I am happier than I have been in a very long time. It is because of the card, is it not?" Sarah asked. "It changed something for you?" Margaret nodded. "It did. It reminded me that love does not end, that the people we lose are still with us in the ways that matter most. And it reminded me that I still have so much to live for, so much to be grateful for." She looked around the room at her family, at the life and love that surrounded her. "I spent so many years after your father died, just existing," she continued, "going through the motions but not really living. The card woke me up. It made me realize that I was wasting the time I had left, and that your father would not have wanted that. He would have wanted me to embrace life, to find joy, to love and be loved." Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "I am so glad you did, Mom. We all are." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Margaret stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the snow that had begun to fall. It was exactly like the night the card had arrived, the flakes drifting down softly, covering everything in white. She touched the locket at her throat and thought about Thomas, about the love they had shared, about the message he had sent across time to reach her when she needed it most. She did not know how the card had taken 20 years to arrive. She did not know what strange journey it had been on, what hands it had passed through, what places it had seen. But she knew that it had arrived at exactly the right moment, and that was all that mattered. Some people might call it coincidence, she thought. Some might say it was just a postal error, a piece of mail that got lost and was eventually found. But Margaret knew better. She knew that there were forces at work in the universe that could not be explained by logic or reason, that there was a kind of magic in the world that revealed itself in moments like this. The card had been a gift, yes, but more than that, it had been a message, a reminder that love transcends all boundaries, that the connections we form with others are eternal, and that we are never truly alone as long as we carry those we love in our hearts. Margaret climbed into bed and turned off the light, and as she drifted off to sleep, she felt Thomas's presence beside her, as real and comforting as it had ever been. And she knew that no matter what the future held, no matter how many more Christmases she had left, she would face them with an open heart and a grateful spirit, honoring the love that had shaped her life and continuing to share that love with everyone around her. The years that followed were good ones for Margaret. She continued to live fully and joyfully, embracing each day as the gift it was. She watched her grandchildren grow, attended their graduations and celebrations, and was there for the important moments in their lives. She traveled more, seeing places she and Thomas had always talked about visiting but never had the chance to. She went to Paris and stood at the top of the Eiffel Tower, feeling the wind in her hair and thinking about how Thomas would have loved the view. She visited the Grand Canyon and marveled at its vastness and beauty. She took a cruise through the Caribbean and felt the warm sun on her face and the salt spray from the ocean. But her favorite times were still the quiet moments at home, sitting in her chair by the fireplace, looking at the Christmas tree, touching the locket at her throat and remembering. She never forgot the lesson the card had taught her, never took for granted the love that surrounded her, never stopped being grateful for the second chance she had been given. And every Christmas, when her family gathered around her, filling her house with warmth and laughter and love, she would tell them the story of the card that arrived 20 years late. She would show them the photograph of her and Thomas, young and full of hope, and she would read them his words. "My dearest Margaret, you are my everything. You will always be the greatest gift I have ever received." And her children and grandchildren would listen, and they would understand that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that it transcends time and space and even death itself, and that the bonds we form with those we love are eternal and unbreakable. Margaret lived to be 93 years old, and when her time finally came, she was surrounded by her family, just as Thomas had been. She held their hands and looked into their faces, seeing the love reflected there, and she felt no fear, no regret. She had lived a full and beautiful life, had loved and been loved, had made a difference in the world in ways both large and small. As she took her last breath, she felt Thomas waiting for her, felt his presence as clearly as if he were standing right beside her. And she knew that they would be together again, that the love that had sustained her through all the years of his absence would finally be reunited with its source. Her children found the card and the locket among her belongings. carefully preserved and treasured. They read Thomas's words again, and they cried, but they also smiled, because they understood that their mother had lived those words, had embodied them, had shown them through her example what it meant to love fully and completely. Sarah kept the locket, wearing it on special occasions, and thinking of her parents whenever she touched it. Michael framed the card and hung in his home, where it served as a daily reminder of the power of love. Emily made copies of the photograph and gave them to all the grandchildren, so that they would always remember their grandparents and the love story that had shaped their family. And every Christmas, when they gathered together, they would tell the story of the card that arrived 20 years late, passing it down to the next generation, ensuring that the lesson it taught would never be forgotten. They would talk about Margaret and Thomas, about the love they had shared, about the way that love had transformed and enriched all of their lives. And in this way, the love that Thomas and Margaret had shared continued to ripple outward, touching lives and hearts across generations, a testament to the enduring power of love and the magic that can happen when we open our hearts to receive the gifts the universe sends us, even when they arrive 20 years late. The story of the Christmas card became a legend in their family, a tale told and retold, each telling adding new layers of meaning and understanding. The grandchildren grew up hearing about it, and when they had children of their own, they passed the story along, keeping alive the memory of two people who had loved each other so deeply that their love had transcended time itself. Emma, who had been 10 years old that first Christmas when Margaret had received the card, grew up to become a writer. She wrote a book about her grandmother's story, changing the names but keeping the heart of it intact, and became a bestseller, touching millions of people around the world. Readers wrote to her sharing their own stories of love and loss, of unexpected gifts and second chances, and Emma realized that her grandmother's experience had been universal, that everyone who had ever loved and lost could find themselves in that story. Jack, who had been 7, became a postal worker himself, inspired by the mysterious journey that card had taken. He took pride in his work, knowing that every piece of mail he delivered might be important to someone, might be carrying a message of love or hope or connection. He thought of his grandmother often as he made his rounds, and he always took extra care with cards and letters, making sure they reached their destination safely. Christopher, Michael's son, became a photographer, and he specialized in capturing moments of love and connection. He photographed weddings and anniversaries and family reunions, and he always told his clients about his great-grandparents and the photograph that had meant so much to his grandmother. He understood that photographs were more than just images. They were memories frozen in time, gifts that could be treasured for generations. And so the legacy continued, each member of the family carrying forward the lessons that Margaret and Thomas had taught them. They learned to cherish the people they loved, to express their feelings openly and often, to never take for granted the time they had together. They learned that love was the most important thing, more important than money or success or any material possession. They learned that the bonds we form with others are what give life meaning, and that those bonds can never truly be broken. Years turned into decades, and the world changed in countless ways. Technology advanced, society evolved, new generations were born, and old ones passed away. But the story of the Christmas card that arrived 20 years late remained constant, a touchstone, a reminder of what truly mattered. In a small town not far from where Margaret had lived, there was a museum dedicated to local history. And in that museum, in a special exhibit about love and connection, there was a display case containing a faded Christmas card, a silver locket, and a photograph of a young couple standing in front of a Christmas tree. Visitors would stop and read the story, and many of them would leave with tears in their eyes and warmth in their hearts. The exhibit became one of the most popular in the museum, and people came from all over to see it. They would stand in front of the display case, reading Thomas's words, looking at the photograph, and they would think about their own loves, their own losses, their own connections. And many of them would leave the museum determined to reach out to someone they had lost touch with, to express their love to someone they had taken for granted, to make the most of the time they had left. In this way, the card continued to work its magic, touching lives and changing hearts, spreading love and connection in ever-widening circles. It had started with Thomas and Margaret, two people who had loved each other deeply and completely. It had continued with their children and grandchildren, who had learned from their example. And now it was reaching strangers, people who had never met Margaret or Thomas, but who were inspired by their story. On a snowy December evening many years after Margaret had passed away, a young woman stood in front of the museum exhibit, reading the story of the Christmas card. She was going through a difficult time, having recently lost her husband to illness, and she felt lost and alone, unsure how to move forward. But as she read Thomas's words to Margaret, as she looked at the photograph of those two young people so full of love and hope, she felt something shift inside her. She realized that her husband's love had not died with him, that it lived on in her heart, in her memories, in the life they had built together. She realized that she could honor his memory not by shutting herself off from the world, but by continuing to live fully, to love deeply, to embrace each day as the gift it was. She left the museum that evening with a new sense of purpose, and she went home and called her sister, whom she had not spoken to in months. They talked for hours, reconnecting, sharing their grief and their love. And the young woman felt, for the first time since her husband's death, that she was going to be okay, that life still held beauty and meaning and possibility. This was the true gift of the Christmas card that arrived 20 years late. Not just a message it carried, beautiful as that was, but the ripple effect it created, the way it inspired people to open their hearts, to reach out, to love more fully. It was a reminder that we are all connected, that our actions and our love can touch lives we will never know about in ways we can never fully understand. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this world, Margaret and Thomas were together again, holding hands and watching the snow fall, knowing that the love they shared continued to make a difference, continued to bring light and warmth to a world that so desperately needed both. The card had taken 20 years to arrive, but its message was timeless. Love never ends. The bonds we form with those we care about are eternal, and sometimes the gifts we need most arrive exactly when we are ready to receive them, even if we have been waiting for decades. On Christmas Eve, in homes all around the world, families gathered together. They exchanged gifts and shared meals, and created memories that would last a lifetime. And in some of those homes, someone would tell the story of the Christmas card that arrived 20 years late, passing along the legend, keeping alive the message of love and hope and connection. Children would listen with wide eyes, imagining the mysterious journey the card had taken. Adults would listen with tears in their eyes, thinking of their own loves and losses. And everyone would be reminded that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that can cross any distance, overcome any obstacle, and endure any trial. The snow fell softly outside, covering the world in white, making everything look new and clean and full of possibility. Inside, fires crackled in fireplaces. Christmas trees twinkled with lights, and the air was filled with the sense of cinnamon and pine and home-cooked meals. And in the midst of all this warmth and beauty, people held each other close and whispered words of love, knowing that these moments were precious, that time was fleeting, and that the connections we make with others are what give life its deepest meaning. This was a legacy of Margaret and Thomas, of the card that had traveled through time to deliver its message. This was the gift they had given to the world, a reminder that love never dies, that it lives on in the hearts of those we touch, and that it has the power to transform lives and heal wounds and bring light to even the darkest places. And so the story continues, passed down through generations, told and retold, each telling adding new meaning and new understanding. It is a story about love and loss, about grief and healing, about the mysterious ways the universe works to bring us exactly what we need when we need it most. It is a story about second chances and new beginnings, about the courage it takes to open our hearts after they have been broken, and about the rewards that come when we do. But most of all, it is a story about the enduring power of love, about the way it transcends all boundaries and limitations, about how it continues to grow and spread and touch lives long after we are gone. It is a reminder that the love we give and receive is never wasted, that becomes part of the fabric of the universe, woven into the lives of everyone we touch. The Christmas card that arrived 20 years late was more than just a piece of mail. It was a miracle, a gift, a message from beyond time and space. It was proof that love never ends, that the people we lose are never truly gone, and that sometimes, when we need it most, the universe sends us exactly what we need to remember that we're loved, we are connected, and we are never alone. And on this Christmas Eve, as the snow falls softly and the world grows quiet and still, that message continues to echo across time and space, reaching hearts that need to hear it, bringing comfort and hope and a reminder that love, true love, lasts forever,